What follows in this performance are my words, the words of Cynthia Hind, and numerous witnesses to strangeness in Zimbabwe and its surrounds. It all happened a long time ago. Between January and March 1978, David cannot be more than specific than that, as he says, time counted for nothing in the bush war. Day after day, month after month, it was the same. David's night vision was very good, and he felt that it was about 50 meters away from where he was, whatever it was, but it should not have been there. They just kept going and hoped for the best. At daybreak, they reached the pickup point and were taken back to the bush base. David was called into the major's tent and debriefed on what he'd seen. He was also asked to draw the object. He was then dismissed, and nothing further was ever said. A few weeks later, David was sent out on patrol when, in other words, they found us before we found them. The object that they saw was not from this earth. It was probably a UFO. He then found himself facing his double across the room. The double was wearing a blue cloak and hood. He was glowing and fading in and out. The first edition of UFO Afro News was printed in July 1988 in Harare, Zimbabwe. Published 8 years after Zimbabwe's independence, Afro News built on over 20 years of research charting extraterrestrial encounters and other unexplained phenomena on the African continent emerging from the 1950s. It was investigated, edited, and largely written by Cynthia Hind, a Zimbabwean ufologist who would become the continental coordinator for Africa in the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, and a global authority on unexplained encounters, or in her terms, strangeness on the continent. The 22 issues of UFO Afro News published across 12 years until Hind's passing in 2000 are packed with meticulously researched records of encounters and phenomena. The records in Afro News jump asynchronously across time and place, lurching the reader across the continent and its histories. This is space travel. When taken as a whole, the issues begin in the depths of secular colonial and apartheid systems, then bear witness to successive liberation and building of independent nation states across the continent, and finally the emergence of complex and contradictory post-colonial states which followed. World-making, terraforming processes are present in this archive, and bizarre, horrific, and unsettling things happen as the euphoric, liberatory, and seismic events previously thought impossible. In her records, Hind captured events through multiple lenses, encouraging people to draw and paint what they had seen. She also produced her own sketches and analytical diagrams, gathering photographs of traces, scratches, and disturbances of the earth. The drawings in particular are often childlike, and while some of them are indeed by children, this extends too to those done by adults. They are shaky, out of proportion, fantastical in their representation of relative scale, they are comical and they are charming. Rather than perceive these characteristics as a failing of their trustworthiness, in their pages of Hind's archives, these images represent the opposite. One who could be thought of as an unreliable, immature, or unbelievable narrator might, precisely because of this, reveal vital information. Here is evidence of something other than truth, which wasn't always Hind's primary concern, but of something worth attending to. One evening, when I was living in South Africa in 1964, I was amongst a group of people, and the conversation turned to Elizabeth Clara and her fantastical plays about outer spacecraft having visited her with space beings on board. Everybody wondered if there might just be something to her stories, and I expressed the opinion that nothing could ever make me entertain that nonsense. A few hours later, I'd gone to bed and switched the light off, and then suddenly I became aware of a soft, fine, vibrating sound, and as I stared into the darkness, I saw a round silver object speeding towards me and stopping just above my face. The sound was like the humming of a swarm of bees in a hive at night, and as I looked at it, I was suddenly inside it, sitting on the surrounding seats and looking out of the window at the earth below, and beside me there were 3 men and 1 woman. She was, to my mind, the epitome of an English country woman. Ufology, as the study of the unexplained, extended beyond extraterrestrial phenomena. In Hines' writing and records, we find illuminations and reflections of very grounded earthly conditions. We enter the cosmos and find the Earth. The pages of Afro-News was often just as concerned with who the person experiencing the encounter was, what the relationship between witnesses was, who else was there, how they felt, what they smelled, as with seemingly more material evidence like traces, residues, or burn marks. Hind categorized the phenomena that she gathered, taking into account, again in her terms, interpretations of tribal law over superstition, and differentiating between white and black reactions, archiving them in a reference table which included categories such as witness reaction, effects on witnesses, physical trace marks and residues, strangeness factor, logical or possible explanations, and more. But strangeness factor was particularly important. John Moore Palacios notes how, with the exception of Barney Hill, no Black Americans have been abducted by aliens. It is almost exclusively a condition of whiteness. Hind reported similarly of the African continent, with the exception of one case which she cast doubt upon. Moore Palacios attributes this to early American colonial captivity narratives, which depicted the violent assault of settlers, taking them against their will across frontiers, and forcing upon them the experience of another culture, a condition Black people already know all too well. In scores of different accounts, abductions are benevolent and often physically desirable features and figures, and engage extraterrestrials delivering acts of goodwill or necessary harms upon populations below them, echoing and extending settler colonial narratives beyond the Earth. These encounters read as vignettes of psychic justification or resolution within a settler colonial imaginary, but perhaps they also reveal imaginary ruptures of these same ideas too. My name is Jenny, and I live in Bulawayo, Zimbabwe. I will try and relate my experience as briefly as possible, keeping to the point. This will be rather difficult as it was initially a psychic experience, and as you're probably aware, this makes someone seem a bit crazy. I saw beautiful young men and women in blue suits like overalls, sitting there with various consoles and computer keyboards, and TV screens above them showing what looked like Earth seen from satellites. I can't remember all that was said, but I gathered that, although they were very kind, some sort of manipulating was going on. One was creating an earthquake in our own interests and helping with overpopulation too. Jenny describes how these encounters somehow only started happening after she emigrated to what was then Rhodesia, and she felt rather scared and a little horrified, but understood that it was the powerful being's very serious duty to be responsible for others' so-called welfare, even when enacted through these acts of manipulation and management of overpopulation. The accounts in Hines' archive include, of course, the famous Ariel school case, in which 62 children at an elite private school in Rua, a farming community outside Harare, Zimbabwe, claim to have seen a spaceship land during their break time. Friday, September 16, 1994, was a beautiful day, clear and warm, with the sun bright in an intensely blue sky. By 10 a.m., it was becoming quite hot, and when the children at Ariel Primary School were let out for their mid-morning break, they ran out shouting and calling to one another with the sheer joy of being free at last for half an hour. The teachers were all in the staff room for the weekly teachers' meeting, and the only other adult on the school premises was Mrs. Kirkman, a physiotherapist, who was voluntarily running the touch shop. Shortly after 10 a.m., a few of the children noticed something strange. They alerted Mrs. Kirkman, as she thought it was a ruse to get her out of the tuck shop so they could steal sweets. Sketching what they had seen, the children, predominantly from white families, drew remarkably similar depictions of thin, black aliens. Half of the accounts focused on their enormous eyes, which are described as being black, thin, tall like a cat's. Moore notes the importance of eyes in American abductions too, quoting Fanon. I am being dissected under white eyes, the only real eyes. I am fixed. The Rua children described varying encounters with the aliens who visited that day. They were always described as black, and frequently as men, and sometimes the children were unclear about what they saw, confusing a potential alien sighting with the school's black maintenance staff. I saw a black man. He was just in black, and he had big eyes. I thought it was an alien, and then I thought maybe it was the gardener or someone. By her own admission, Hind had far fewer accounts from black people in the countries she studied, and of course these are among the most fascinating in the archives. On August 15, 1981, 20 black labourers returning from work in the fields at La Rochelle, a forestry commission station near Mutare in East Zimbabwe, saw a fireball rolling across the grounds. Clifford Muchena, the head of the group, recalled, "It walked up the wall of a tower and entered the top window. Then it burst into flames." As Clifford rushed to ring the warning bell, the fire gathered into a ball and came down the tower wall and then burst into flames again at an outbuilding housing an orchid collection known as the Fantasy. The Fantasy had been made by the former white owners of the forestry who had taken off during a period of white flight following independence. Running to douse the flames, Clifford saw 3 men standing there with their backs to him. I couldn't see their faces because there was so much light shining from them that I had to put my hands up to protect my eyes. They were wearing shiny overalls. All of the witnesses that Hines spoke to that day were convinced that what they had seen were ghosts, or rather spirits of ancestors, or possibly a shave, known in Shona culture as a lost spirit who has not found their way to reconciliation between the airborne and the earthly realm, due to some disquiet or incompleteness in the process of their passings. There was no question in their minds that the figures were anything else. They had never heard of UFOs, nor of men from outer space, and they were openly skeptical of the moon landing. Hind challenged Muchena. "But Clifford, didn't your ancestors wear clothes of hide and not shiny overalls?" "Yes," he responds, "but times change." These accounts open up a parallel world. As in Muchena's encounter at La Rochelle, strangeness is not something unexplained at all, but is rather very well understood through Indigenous cosmologies. But outer space is not something that happens in another realm, but rather is conjoined with our material and metaphysical worlds, our grounded planetary responsibilities and roles right here on Earth. In the final issue of UFO Afro-News, published in July 2000, Hind laments that most African cases are ignored by the wider UFO community, writing, "I suppose because there were so few investigators. No astronomy professors or astrophysicists, just ordinary, reasonably educated people." Hind passed away the following month. Trying to follow Hind's investigative work leads me inevitably to various corners of the internet. Facebook groups and early web pages, message boards and the like, with a disquieting frequency, I find myself landing on Rhodesian nostalgia groups, and increasingly so as the rhetoric of Rhodesia experiences a resurgence in the global supremacist imaginary. These fictitious narrations of place and time continue to be visited by a kind of strangeness, disquieting encounters, unidentifiable beings that rupture logics and spread unease, and phenomena that trouble the violent and discriminatory world that they seek to sustain. In the final pages of the last issue, Hind reflects on where all these aliens may have come from. I don't think they're from other planets. I think they are earthly, from another time or dimension. They are spectres, tsotsis, tokolos, shave, that infiltrate, black insiders, ball lightning, headlights that approach head-on and then suddenly disappear, figures which refuse to be dissected and instead threaten to overwhelm and perhaps even end worlds from within. Today we know that the laser beam technology of UFOs is far beyond our conception of its uses. They can lift large, heavy objects and negate gravity. Today, ufologists realize that the hundreds of thousands of people who report UFO experiences cannot all be lying. Today, too, we know that most people with intelligence realize that something is going on in our skies of which we Earthlings are unaware. The final solution to the UFO controversy will not come from the skeptics. It will come from careful investigation, logical analysis of the facts, and from you, the public, with your querying minds and interesting case histories. Do not be afraid to contact us with your information. And your information, if that is your wish, will be treated in the strictest confidence, although it will be used to further this fascinating study. We are waiting to hear from you.